series that I think is very aptly titled by our own Professor Eugene Schlossberger, Philosophy Matters. And of course, philosophy matters to us in multiple senses. It matters in the sense that, what? It's part of what we do when we think carefully about any part of our lives. We delve into questions about what it means to be just, what it means to be right, what it means to be good, what it means to find truth. So philosophy matters because it's the bottom of all things we think. But philosophy matters also suggests all the different ways in which philosophy can take on different matters or different materials. So this year, the materials we're going to address for this new series that's designed to embrace both the experienced philosopher and the general public, people coming to philosophy for the first time, is the question of how philosophy can deal with popular culture matters. And in this first talk, we're going to see how we can investigate popular culture in light of philosophy through Dr. John Rowan's presentation on Harry Potter and the Muggle Malaise. And I really don't want to take up any more of John's time, but I will do one more bit of shameless self-promotion.
Yeah, go ahead.
There will be one more talk in this series this month. It's going to happen, I believe, here, and it will be the day before Halloween, October 30th. So if you would like to come and see me in costume, or hopefully not see me because of costume, we'll be doing a talk on horror and moral monstrosity, the case of Hannibal Lecter. So we'll be extending the moral considerations developed tonight in a sort of nicer world of Muggles and Wizards by John into a pretty dark world by me at the end of the month. If you have any questions at the end or you want to know more about us, please talk to me. And in the interim, please give John a huge hand.
So, yeah, just quickly to follow up on Renee's introduction, we are planning 4 talks this year in this new series, Philosophy Matters. And each year, the plan is to have a particular theme. So we thought about some different themes this year. We thought about philosophy and technology, for example, because that's one of the major themes of this year's One Book, One University. Some of you know as The Shallows. But we decided on popular culture. And popular culture can be a lot of different things. And I thought about doing something on the Hunger Games, some of you are familiar with, but they won't even have their second movie out until, not that I'm a huge fan or anything, but November 22nd at 12 noon. And the books, I guess, are out. But Harry Potter, let me ask you this. How many people of you, because I'm going to be relying on you all, how many of you have read all the books? Oh, good, okay. So you're going to know probably, I've read them all. Seen all the movies? Yes? Okay, good. So I want this to be a discussion. Yeah, I'm going to sort of go through topics, categories, but I want you all to chime in. So don't be afraid to do so. Let's not have this evening be the kind of lecture where I stand up here and talk and then you have these questions. Let me know if you want to say something. In fact, I'm going to need you to say some things pretty early on. I'm going to use the world of Harry Potter to talk about a particular category of philosophy, social justice. And social justice is actually a subcategory within ethics, one of the main branches of philosophy. Social justice. Justice. We all think we have a sense of what it means until we try to define it, and then it gets harder to do. But that's not uncommon in philosophy. Sometimes it's easier to define a particular term or figure out a concept by looking at its opposite. And if we think about injustice, maybe we have a better sense of what it is, or at least can feel like we can identify instances of injustice. Something connects and we want to say, that's wrong. The particular action being leveled against somebody, or maybe a certain social policy against a group, that just seems wrong. That seems to be a matter of injustice. So there are injustices, or so I would claim, that occur in the world of Harry Potter. And as a philosopher, I like the idea of taking those examples and trying to see what we can learn from those, maybe about our own Muggle world. as it were. So let me open up with this particular clip. And before I play anything, can you all see this, or do you need the lights to be dimmed? Okay, because we might have to dim maybe on and off a couple of times. And since you all know so much, you probably know that this is from the second entry in the series, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets.
Harry Potter. Such an honor it is.
Who are you?
Dobby, sir. Dobby the house elf.
Not to be rude or anything, but this isn't a great time for me to have a house elf in my bedroom.
Oh, yes, sir. Dobby understands. It's just that Dobby has come to tell you it is difficult, sir. Dobby wonders where to begin.
Why don't you sit down?
Sit down. Oh.
Dobby, shush, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you or anything.
Offend Dobby? Dobby has heard of your greatness, sir, but never has he been asked to sit down by a wizard like an equal.
You can't have met many decent wizards then.
No, I haven't. That was an awful thing to say. Dobby!
Stop! Dobby! Dobby, shush! Oh, Dobby, please!
Okay. So I figured I'd start with the house elf. That's what was advertised on the flyer. Just as a quick initial scan, did anyone get a sense of any injustices that this clip might suggest? Anyone have sort of a feel one way or the other? Yeah.
Kind of like a caste system.
A caste system, meaning?
Like there's a certain hierarchy of how important some people are in comparison to others.
So with importance, I mean, house elves certainly seem less important to their masters. But what about, for instance, the view of themselves? How do house elves view themselves? Anyone?
Well, as unequals, and obviously also as someone who should punish themselves if a wizard, if for some reason they feel they've done something wrong, even if they haven't.
So, excellent. I bring this up because when we talk about issues of social justice, we often think about, and this is the most important part, how one group views or treats a different group in society. But one of the things I want to look at some point this evening is, what about the self-perception of a group? I mean, at one point in these books, do you remember Hermione creates the SPEW, Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, if I got that right. And it tends not to go very far. I mean, she thinks there are injustices, but not that many people sort of join forces with her. And Ron Weasley's argument is, look, they want this. They want to be servants. This is their view of themselves. There's nothing really wrong here. I think that's another sort of interesting angle to this. Okay, let me step back for a second and ask you this question, and again, just to get some examples out there. Other than house elves, anywhere in the series, are there groups that you think might be victims of injustice? Maybe? There's no right or wrong answer. Tell me your name.
Angelica.
Angelica, okay.
The half-bloods. So like the people that were born not from a wizarding family, or so they have Muggle blood in them. They're usually like the Malfoys. They're always like saying like, oh, they should all die.
Yeah. Well, they're different. There are different degrees of these sorts of unjust attitudes. Half-bloods. What's the term for if you come from Muggle parents, but you're both Muggle parents?
Mudbloods.
Mudbloods. Think about what that suggests. Impure blood, impure lineage. Your blood is dirty. It's not It's not clean. Okay. We've got mudblood, certainly half-bloods. Who else? What other groups? Anything you can think of? Think of Dolores Umbridge. She hates everybody except me. What was her view toward Hagrid? He's big, he's the ugly bee. I can't remember exactly what some of the quotes were. She refers to him and some centaurs and mer people as half-breeds in this really derogatory way. One thing that caught my attention as I was sorting through this, what about the role of women in the world of Harry Potter? Anyone sense any injustices against women? I didn't. I mean, that was one group where I would say, well, in our society, again, our Muggle society, it seems that there still exists a certain degree of sexism, and I could talk about things in society with unequal pay and opportunity and so forth. But in the world of Harry Potter, women don't seem to be victims of this kind of oppression. In fact, when you think about traditionally male kinds of activities, there's the profession of being an Auror, which is death hunt. What are they? Death hunters, death eaters. Thank you. I told you. And they're Quidditch, a sport, and the teams are selected purely on the basis of ability and merit. You get as many female students on the Quidditch teams at Hogwarts as you do the males, and so there just doesn't seem to be any real differentiation there, which again seemed interesting to me. We have some examples. And we have a sense, just a sense at this point, that there might be these types of injustices occurring in Harry Potter's world. But as a philosopher, I thought it would be important to at least spend a few minutes talking about the concept of justice so that we can be more sure about the claims we want to make. And I'm just going to use Aristotle's basic conception of justice when he says it's about treating equals equally, which is about as, if someone were to ask me to define justice, I'd probably talk for 45 minutes, right? Because it's hard for me to do anything succinctly. Philosophy is hard for any of us. But this is about as clean as it can be. He actually says, he adds to this, it's about treating equals equally and treating unequals unequally. What do you think that means? Unequals, equally, unequally. Any guess? Mark?
Everyone. No one is equal to anybody, so we're all equal. And even I, at this moment, am not equal to me at this particular moment. We live in a world of flux.
You know you have a philosophy student when he says, even I am not equal to me. This is not about metaphysics, but if it were. Okay. If we're going to talk about this, and we're thinking about injustice, because again, I think we can better define justice, or at least get a better handle on it, if we talk about its opposite, injustice. Injustice would then be treating equals unequally. What does it mean to say equals? Okay, this is a moral concept here. And I guess the way I would describe it is we tend to think, and I think I speak for most people, we tend to believe, Mark, most people, no, we tend to believe that, at least in a moral sense, all of us as people are equal in a certain very basic fundamental sense. It's not the case that, I consider some people morally superior to me or morally inferior. I know there are people who do, hence injustice in our society. But Aristotle and other philosophers, in talking about equality as it relates to justice, meant this very basic moral sense. Okay? The idea of injustice arises then when we talk about treating others who are our moral peers and equals in a way that is unequal, as something less than myself. More specifically, I want to, it can mean other things, but equality of opportunity here. Right? When it comes to justice, more often than not, it refers to opportunities that people have in life. Okay. Most basic level, justice, this is an ethical concept, remember. Justice is about everybody having the opportunity to create, design the kind of life they want to live, and then being free to do so. This is one reason we consider something like the right to education for all a basic component of justice. And we don't want to deny education to some but not others. If you don't have an education, you're not able to think about the kind of life you want to live. You're not able to acquire the skills you need to put your life plan into action. That doesn't seem right. So that's what I mean by equality of opportunity. There are different ways that you can affect the opportunities you have. Voting. Right? When we deny certain people voting rights, or have in the past, we deny them the chance to help shape the society that they're supposed to be a part of. 100 years, to you guys, most of you students, I know that sounds like a long time. You get to be my age, 100 years doesn't sound that long. It was less than 100 years ago that women did not have the right to vote in our society, as an example. That seems like an injustice, right? I mean, if today we were to start talking about, well, maybe these people just don't need to have the right to vote at all, that would just seem wrong. Okay, different degree of that. Anyone know what the poll tax was? Poll tax and voting? Okay, well, yep, Mark.
As I recall, it was something used in the South to pay for certain things or another. As a way of getting money out of the public.
Yeah. So when you showed up to the polls to vote, you would have to pay money.
Yeah. Everyone was treated equally. They all had to pay an equal per capita tax.
Good. Now we're getting into the philosophy here, because let's say everyone has to pay $1 to vote. That seems like it's equal, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's say everyone has to pay $10 to vote. That's equal. Everyone has to pay $1,000 to vote. Okay. Now you're getting to the point where there are some people in society who they're really not going to be able to afford that. In which case, you have something like a moral principle or a law where it looks equal on the surface, but in practice, it denies some people opportunity, some segment of the population, the poor, the opportunities that other people have. And hence, you would be treating equals unequally. That makes sense? So what about something like, if it's not poll tax, what about something like currently voter ID as a law? Yeah, there are a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. Right? We're not here to actually engage in the debate, but at least understand why some people might see it as an injustice and others might not. It seems to be an equal application of a rule. Look, anyone who wants to show up to vote, you need to have a photo ID. And, okay, maybe that's okay. The question for social justice is, does that kind of rule end up denying a certain segment or some people the same opportunities that are granted to others? Okay. Now, if it's the case that poorer people or older people are less likely to have an ID and are less likely to be able to obtain an ID, they're going to have a harder time voting. And then you have to look at the facts and see just what that situation is. Any questions or comments at this point? We are coming back to Harry Potter. So the unequal treatment we're talking about, sometimes it can be referred to as discrimination, right? Discrimination, by the way, just the word by itself, is not anything that's sort of morally laden in a negative sense. We discriminate all the time in ways that are not unethical. Sometimes it's positive. We say, oh, you have discriminating taste in wine, or whatever. I shouldn't say that because you guys are under 21, some of you might, I don't know. When we hire professors at the university, we discriminate when we have some applicants who don't meet the minimum criteria. We say, oh, this person's a high school dropout, right? Maybe they shouldn't be a university professor, and we put them to the side. But we have reasons for I know, Jeanette, it's terrible. But we have reasons for doing it, but we think we have good reasons. And in a way, that's not treating equals unequally, because anyone, regardless of all these other morally irrelevant characteristics, anyone who meets the minimum criteria will be considered. Makes sense, right? But discrimination on the basis of something morally irrelevant, gender, race, ethnicity, sexual preference, I mean, we can talk about and we can debate which elements would be morally relevant or morally irrelevant. But I wanted to make a point of that, because when we use the term discrimination, don't make too many assumptions right off the bat. You have to think about the context in which it's being used. Okay. So how can unequal treatment among equals ever be justified? Here's one occasional justification that's used, right? It is unequal treatment of unequal beings or groups. In other words, it's not unjust because if we're differentiating or discriminating between two different groups, there's a reason to. These groups are not equal in the first place. Sometimes that is used. Unfortunately, it has been used historically in some ways which we now look back on and say that's just not acceptable. We have a very unfortunate history in terms of racial discrimination, and we had times in our history where we said some races are inferior, are not equal to. Okay, so you have to be careful of those kinds of claims. I have a feeling Dolores Umbridge might say this about centaurs, for example, or about giants. Someone might say that the unequal treatment is only apparent. It looks unequal, but it's not. Employee in the company, employee in the company. You ma'am, you get 4 weeks of vacation per year. I'm sorry, sir, you only get 2. Is that an unethical approach for a boss to take? I don't think you know yet. It might look unequal on the surface, but we have a policy. Once you're here 10 years, you get 4 weeks. Once you're here 5 years, you get a 3rd week. You've only been here a year. You only get 2 weeks. See, that's fairly applied. I say fairly meaning equally, because seniority might well be considered something that's relevant to the amount of vacation you get in a year. And then I want to mention this one because this too has been something unfortunate that's been used in the past. Function, like some natural trait means your function is to be treated differently. You get the sense, especially from the way Lucius Malfoy treats Dobby when Dobby was his servant. That's the function of house elves, is to serve. Okay. One other. Put this one up. One other quick discussion, and then we're going to come back to the Harry Potter context and use some of this. Sometimes injustice begins with or is a function of attitudes, right? And you know this. I mean, you see it in the movies. You might harbor attitudes you don't know you have. Maybe if you're like me, right, my grandparents did, and I didn't realize it till I was older. But you say, well, those kinds of people, they're different. And even if they never said it, there's this idea up here. And there's a realization when someone else who comes into the room, who is different, there's an awareness. And there's an awareness that's not there when the person who comes in the room is like you. These attitudes can lead to behaviors eventually. There I am on the bus. One gets on, yeah, good morning, how you doing? Someone else gets on the bus. Check my wallet. I'm not into the social psychological research. I don't keep up with that. My understanding is there's a lot of that goes on. Like Dave Nowbone, Professor Nowbone could probably tell me. In fact, one of the honors courses you taught was something about this.
Yes,
Good. Yeah, well, that's right on par. So you get individual behaviors by certain people. Now, those behaviors, in turn, they're going to go back and reinforce the attitude. You do something enough, your attitude is strengthened. So this is the circular nature of it. After a while, the individual behaviors, separately, create this common social stigma, where it's sort of known, oh, you have to be careful of those people. And after you get the social stigma, you sometimes actually get social structures changing. Hence, things like a poll tax, which, whether they were intended to do so, had the effect of discriminating on the basis of morally irrelevant characteristics in certain parts of the country. So every time you go down here, you say, well, that reinforces this. But it also lends, in this slippery slope kind of way, to some sort of ill-defined social stigma. That contributes to more behaviors and more attitudes. And it's something that, once it gets going, can be really hard to stop. And we've seen that. We've seen that historically over many, many years. Okay. So, given all that, let me come back to what you guys said. And was it Angelica? Right?
Yes.
In the wizard world, right, the Malfoys had these attitudes, which sometimes were exhibited in behaviors, toward the Weasleys. And it was on the basis of what? On the basis of... This is from the Chamber of Secrets. Malfoy said, what's the use of being a disgrace to the name of wizard if they don't even pay you well for it? Okay? There's a sense there that, okay, wealth matters. Wealth makes you inferior to me. You have less wealth. Arthur Weasley gives his response. And then you have Lucius, getting into something else. He said, clearly, associating with muggles. And I thought your family could sink no lower. So, I mean, there's two shots in one there. Muggles are so low as to not even warrant being, any of us associating with them. They're bad, but you're bad because you're associating with them. Again, my parents were good people, so don't take the. They grew up in the South, in the first half of the 20th century, and so there were certain attitudes that were prevalent that made it really hard for them to identify while they were growing up. And so, when my father, 8 years old, Birmingham, Alabama, 1930s, he brings a friend home to play who doesn't look like him. Later that evening, his mother says, "You're not supposed to bring them here." Think about this. And this is kind of the same thing. I mean, there's an alignment here. And as a philosopher, what I would like to do is, I love reading Harry Potter for entertainment. Okay, hopefully that's clear right now. But I also, maybe by the second or sixth time I read, I would like to sort of dig in more in terms of what's really going on and think about some parallels to our own society. Okay. So maybe it's just it's not even the poor, because the Weasleys are not poor. Middle class, I don't know what the right term would be, but those who are just lower off, a class distinction. John?
Weasleys have a lot of children. a very big family. Malfoy, I think, had one son.
Yeah, there was only Draco, right? Yeah. Now, I don't know that was the difference. I think Lucius being the Death Eater and having this sort of in with the Ministry of Magic had some connections that Arthur Weasley worked for the Ministry of Magic, but I don't think he had the same kinds of connections. I'm not exactly sure how the wealth came about. What about? Well, I've mentioned this one a couple of times. These groups that Umbridge targeted. There were others in here too. Werewolves. They're different. Or they're from different places. Yeah? Do you think in our society, what are we, October 2nd, 2013, do you think there are any attitudes harbored against some people because they're from different countries? Do you think those attitudes translate into behaviors for some people? Do you think those behaviors create a social stigma and then get into the actual social policy? Does anyone remember the Arizona law, which was recently struck down as unconstitutional? What that was about? Say again?
SB 1070.
Apparently you know. SB 1070. And what did it call for?
You could be asked for your immigration papers at any time in public, and there was a lot of speculation that it was on the basis of racial profiling.
You could be asked, speculation, yeah, and then research that actually bore this out. But you could be asked, stopped at any point and asked for your immigration papers. Who's going to be more likely to be asked for the, okay. Now look, you might say, well, that's unfortunate. You might say, well, that's one of the prices we pay for freedom. We could talk about it. I'm not going to talk about it now. Of course, maybe less freedom for some and more freedom for others. I'd have to think about how that would work. But is it having an impact on equality of opportunity? For some people, apparently, who got stopped by this law, there certainly was the potential for it. And it was found to be out of step with our actual Constitution. Now, what's the New York City issue? What's it called? Stop and frisk. Nate's got it. And police can just stop you. Is it for any reason?
Yeah.
They don't have to have any reason at all.
No reason.
Yeah, you. And they wouldn't say this. Right? Something about you. Come here. Let me see if you got anything.
And it was disproportionately racial minority.
Well, in our society, right, there are just clear groups which have not only historically been disadvantaged, but they continue to be. And I know that some people like to say, well, I've heard some people say racism is over. Come on. I mean, look at any data. Right? You're not going to. Okay. We talked about Muggles. We talked. Now, this one to me. If you're going to say mudbloods, right? This is actually just a really derogatory term too. In Harry Potter. Anyone want to take again, there are no wrong answers. It's a discussion. But anyone want to take a stab at sort of an analog in our world, contemporary or historical, that might go along with this? Talking about blood-related lineage, John.
Years ago, I worked for a stockbroker, a rather small one, and they hired this young woman to work in the back office. She came in on a Saturday. She brought her son. Her son was mixed. She was gone Monday.
again, might seem like a longer time to you, but it wasn't until 1967 when it became a constitutionally protected right that individuals of different races could marry. And it's in the ballpark, it's not exactly this. But we're supposed to keep the races separate. And then you go back to 1954, that was the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. Separate but equal. We have to be equal, social justice, we'll just keep them separate, but we'll treat them, in practice that doesn't work. I think that this makes sense, especially when you think about the term mudblood as an epithet, right? It carries so much, but there's so much context behind it. And you can think of analogous words, unfortunately, in our society, which are now basically forbidden. They refer to, the N word it has become. And that's because of not just because it's offensive, but this is something in philosophy which we would talk about in terms of justice. There's offensiveness, but then there is real harm in terms of, you don't carve into someone's arm. All right, that's fine. This is Hermione in Deathly Hallows being tortured by, what's her name? Bellatrix, thank you. But we're talking about just the use of a term. When I was watching this for the first time, it wasn't immediately clear to me. But watch Hermione's reaction.
The Gryffindor team had to buy their way in. They got it on pure talent.
No one asked your opinion, you filthy little muggler. She'll pay for that one now for it. Eat slugs!
Okay. Sorry, let's get rid of that. And it turned out that, they went and they told Hagrid. He said, how could anyone say such a thing? Apparently, these have, some words can have real force. If you want to look up, this was about 20 years ago, the book I'm thinking of. There's a book by a feminist philosopher, and it's called Only Words. And it's about this distinction when it comes to justice between words and actions. And her argument was that the distinction is a false one, because words are actions. So you can't just simply hide and say, sticks and stones, it's only names, it's only words. What happens is, according to her argument, people who are attacked by these types of words, these types of epithets, there's real damage done. Not in a physical sense, not directly in an economic sense, in a psychological sense. What do we all need? What's one thing we all need to be successful that comes from within, would you say? What's a good word or term? What do you think I'm thinking of? Not you. Self-esteem. Thank you, Professor Doberstein. Self-esteem. But again, I'm not a psychologist, but I understand that the research suggests that self-esteem depends in part not just on what you can do for yourself internally, but on how you're treated by others. That makes sense to me. My sense of self-worth. Sometimes philosophers call it a self-concept. And the argument has been put forth that if you are consistently referred to in a negative way, especially with these terms that have such historically negative significance, you become damaged. You become sort of almost incapable of thinking that you are good enough. Hence the damage to equality of opportunity, if that makes sense. Okay. By the way, I'm going to add on to these in a couple of minutes. Real quick, why do you think people discriminate in the morally unacceptable sense? What's the cause of that? and of course I'm getting at a deeper question, is what is the root cause of injustice? What's a reason? What contributes to it?
A lot of times it might feed their own insecurities.
So those who discriminate and perpetuate injustices, they themselves are insecure. And you add on to that or something, Ian?
So say they don't know, but there's just like some kind of ignorance involved. They don't know the other person.
I think you're onto two really good things here. Yeah.
Well, it helps to perpetuate a social dynamic that leaves them in a dominant position in a power structure.
Okay.
Discrimination perpetuates that power structure, and there are conferred benefits on a dominant group.
It's an effective strategy for keeping them in a position of power.
Yeah.
Okay, but let me push that further. So why do it? Why does one want to perpetuate this differential of power?
Because it comes with all sorts of great stuff.
Okay, then that's my, maybe just basic human greed. I'm in the haves, they're in the have-nots. If we were to really sort of change that, I'd have to come down and I want to stay in my position of power.
And of course, it's very rarely a calculation, a rational calculation, but it emerges organically.
Yeah. Now again, that's a little over my head, but it sounds good.
It just seems like survival of the fittest, but in like social terms.
Yeah. So social Darwinism. Anyone ever heard that?
I'll give you a little bit unpopular psychological answer. It's a
Oh,
basic
dear.
psychological mechanism as well. As soon as we understand that people are different, we start categorizing them. And there's a tendency to say, well, my it's better than yours.
Good. Difference. I referred to giants and other as being different, and once they're seen as different, fill that in. What happens? We have this. Is it a need? What would you say
It's
to?
called an in-group bias. So basically, my group is better than the group to which I don't belong.
I think all of these sound good to me. I don't know about you guys. Fear, insecurity, ignorance, greed, natural bias. One more thing on this. What's the solution to that? How do you get past your fears that someone who's different could be a threat? Even if you're not thinking about it in those terms, how would you do that? How would you get past your ignorance? Oh, I don't know anything about them, but they're different. I better be careful. How would you get past that? What's the tool? Education. I'm in favor of education, if you can't tell. Yeah, please.
Realistically, though, don't groups tend to just gang up on other groups at that point?
I think if I were to just make some observations of society, that I bet I would observe a lot of groups ganging up on other groups. But here, education, thinking rationally, here's what occurs to me. What constitutes a group exactly? How I happen to have, through no control, certain color skin, through no control, no choice, I happen to have blue eyes. Now, Nader has brown eyes.
Yes.
Right. Is he in my group? I mean, I don't go around saying, hey, we don't want any of that, But, I mean, are groups natural? Are groups artificial? So, I mean, I don't know. These are the kinds of questions. I'm here to, in philosophy, we don't answer questions, we ask them. So that's what I'm doing. But you could take the position, you could at least consider the claim that if groups are artificially constructed, meaning injustice is something we ourselves invented. It's not, these things aren't natural. I mean, what would happen if we were invaded someday from space by aliens? It's possible. We all might say, hey, we're all in this together. We're in the same group now. And maybe this is just we're so early on in human history or something. I don't know. Maybe the thing is that the way we emerge from tribes to villages to cities and nation states and all that is because of potential threats externally. And then we band together. And then we come to see how we are much more alike than we are different. And I really think that all of us are much more alike than we are different. And so let's get past some of these differences. In the wizarding world, be nice if they did. This is about as close to, what, slavery as you would get. In our society, slavery is associated with, with race historically, but throughout history, it's been in any number of different socially identified traits. What about this idea? Again, philosophical question. Slavery, by definition, one might say, is the restriction or complete denial of one's freedom without that person's consent. Right? That's slavery. And we could argue about the definition, but let's say that's a reasonable one. And then you have Dobby the house elf. You have Creature at the House of Black, Sirius Black. And it seems like they want to do this? They accept their position? My question is, are house elves being denied freedom against their will? Because if it's not, if it's something they want to be doing, if it's something where they recognize themselves, this is what I do.
It seems like labeling theory. Like, people are assigned a label, and then as they live with this label, they learn to adapt to it, and they learn to accept it. So, like, that's how deviancy works and becomes more populous.
Yeah. Any thoughts about that? Labeling? Yeah.
I was going to say, slavery might not be the best analogy I could come up with, because by definition, slaves generally don't choose their slavery. I might argue something like women in what we consider very backward cultures, such as in Saudi Arabia, where women are not allowed to drive or leave the house without permission. But it gets back to the issue of choice, versus slavery is more.
There, again, as a philosopher, yes. So many great questions. What constitutes free choice? I mean, what really constitutes free choice? You have to think about that question if you're going to put this discussion of social justice into context. I'm going to talk again about my mother. Grew up, it's not that bad. Is this going on YouTube or something?
Eventually.
We'll warn your mother.
Oh, trust me, my mother doesn't use YouTube. How did I get on my mother? You might not believe me, but she's afraid to use the remote control. She's like, you might set the lamp on fire. My sister still torments her by aiming the remote at the cat. She's like, no, don't do that. So I'm not really too worried. Okay. My mother, growing up in 1930s North Carolina, still the South. But at this point in our history, I don't think that was the issue. The issue was my mother was female, and the claim is made by some that this was an example at that point in time of some people's self-conception, some people, their limits on their free choice being defined in large part by societal norms and expectations. I don't know exactly how accurate this is, because on Snopes.com, which some of you know, they debunked one of these, but I did ask my mother about this. What I'm talking about is a home economics textbook from the 1940s. And I said, Mom, did you really read this stuff? And I gave her, she's like, oh yeah, that's what you did. The guys, the men, they went to shop And the girls, they went to home economics. And in home economics, we read books that told us things like this. Here's how to be a good wife. Now again, this specific quotation, I can't verify that it's, it's legitimate, but according to my mother, who actually her memory was pretty good, she said this is exactly what it was about. This is one example. Oh, sorry. It's all about the guy, isn't it? Listen to him. There were so many of these, I didn't want to cut any of them from the... Make the evening his. I love this one. Never complain if he does not take you out. Try to understand his world of strain and pressure. Okay. Now, and I also happen to find, there are some others, I won't show you. I also happen to find this, an ad for Battleship. I don't know exactly the year. It looks 50s, maybe early 60s.
67.
Ha-
It's 1967. Battleship.
The title would be in.
Yeah, of the image.
Oh, that would be a good way to know. Wow. Yeah. So you can see like what's going on. Oh, it's after dinner. It's time to play, except not if you're female. Okay. So my mother, and pretty much all of many of her generation, I said, Mom, did you ever want to do something more in terms of profession, career? It's like, no, not really. I wanted to be, a housewife. I wanted to take care of the kids. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I mean, people can legitimately do that, male or female. That can be a free choice. But one could hypothesize that with 95% of the women deciding not to pursue a professional career, and instead staying, they were affected by these societal expectations that came along with things like high school and the media and marketing campaigns and whatever the case may be. So when we look at, get rid of this. When we look at Dobby the house elf, we say it's what I want to do. There's a real issue here about whether it's something he really wants to do, or whether he's in a position, whether he has the self-concept to be able to look at himself and say, am I really an equal? Again, a lot of psychological stuff going on there. And there is no analog. Well, women are not the targets of discrimination. So I'll just move that one over, as I said. In popular culture, there's a whole series of books, as some of you may know, popular culture and philosophy. There's Seinfeld in philosophy, Monty Python in philosophy. There's actually a book, Harry Potter and Philosophy. And if you ever wanted to look it up, there's a really interesting piece on Hermione as kind of personifying the strength and abilities of women in the world of Harry Potter. And I got to thinking about it, and it occurred to me, yeah, I think there are. I mean, I myself happen to like this one.
Look who's here.
Ah, come and see the show.
You foul, loathsome, evil little cockroach!
Hermione, no! He's not worth it. Okay. Let's go. Quick.
That felt good.
Not good. Brilliant.
Okay. even the first, I won't play it, but even the very first time they met on the train, when Hermione met Ron and Harry for the first time, she comes in, she can do some magic, she's smart, she's putting down Ron because he's got dirt on his face, and she fixes his glasses. And just right from the beginning, you had the sense that there were not going to be any social issues with respect to something like sexism. Not really in Harry Potter's world. All right. Last thing I want to do, because I've been talking for quite a while now, is the last question I want to consider. When we do recognize social injustice in our society, what, if anything, is our obligation? Again, Hermione recognized, according to what she believed, that there were these issues with house elves being made to serve. She wanted to be proactive about it, form a society, do something positive. And we see in our society historically, people, Rosa Parks obviously, or Martin Luther King, people who actively fight this. When we recognize injustice, do we all have this obligation to proactively go out and do something about it? That's one. Some people might say, no, we don't have an obligation to do anything. And there are reasons for that. We have to think about which reasons would be more compelling. And then there's actually this sort of middle ground where you could say, maybe we don't have this strong, positive obligation to go fight the injustice to the rest of society, but maybe we should refrain from our individual actions which happen to support it. I guess I shouldn't name any corporations by name, but imagine a really large box store that has come into various neighborhoods over the past few decades and run out mom and pop stores, and let's say that this corporation makes lots and lots of money, but they're constantly accused of treating workers in really bad ways and not giving them promotions and discriminating against them. And let's say, in this wildly hypothetical example, that, that they get their products, their merchandise, from overseas, where it's documented that the workers work in very poor conditions and don't get much. I mean, to say they don't get much money is an understatement. Okay. Now, let's say we know this, we've learned this. There's irrefutable evidence of this. One thing we could do is join some group that says, we're going to fight this. We want everyone to know what this corporation's doing. Another thing we could do is not change our behaviors, keep shopping there because they're really low prices. You smile on me. Or maybe there's that middle ground. Maybe one could argue we have a duty at least to refrain from shopping there, because by shopping there we are supporting that kind of oppression, that kind of behavior. I'm not saying anything, I'm just asking the question. Because again, that's what we do. All right, so I've been talking for a long time. I want to hear more from you guys. You've been helpful in assisting me, naming some things that I've forgotten and pointing out some great examples. We've done a lot, I mean, just in the little bit less than an hour that we've been talking about here. What do you have to say?
About Dobby.
Yeah.
That was bothering me. Ever since I've seen the film, I've not read to the end of the series, but and I guess spoiler alert,
okay, cover your ears, because
Yeah, if you've not seen the end of the series, I guess this is what. So Dobby lays down his life at the end of the film in order to save Harry Potter. And throughout the series, Dobby maintains or seems to maintain many of the attitudes that he held as a house elf. And he has a very exaggerated reverence for Harry Potter, who earlier in the series sort of rescues him from his servitude. And that reverence leads him later on to sacrifice himself in order to save Harry Potter. But to me, it always seemed like that was part of his low self-esteem, part of these attitudes that he had developed as pretty much a slave and that he saw his life as less valuable than Harry Potter's because of this, and so his sacrifice was so easy. And while in the films, and I don't know about the series, it's played as this kind of heroic martyrdom, and he's done this great thing, but it seems to be part of this system of his oppression, which leads to it in the first place.
There's the immediate question, which is, and I guess we can't really know, even from the book as I remembering it, you can't really know what Dobby is thinking. But what is his motivation, Dobby's, for laying down his life? If part of it was shaped by this previous oppression, then Dobby's free choice to do this, we would say, was maybe a little less free than we would think. That's not how it's portrayed. To me, it was portrayed in the same way that lots of others laid down their lives for Harry Potter. They were doing it for a cause. And if it was part of the cause, then some causes are worth dying for. But it's hard to, that question persists. And I think that's one of the things, well, there are lots of things annoy me about injustice, but that's one of them. Because you want to say, don't you, that no one should have to be put in a position simply because they're born into a certain class or a certain skin color or a certain family. No one should have to be put in a position where they have to be liberated and then feel a sense of debt. I mean, otherwise, say, oh, you hired me when I was homeless. I'll forever be in your debt. I mean, the fact that someone was born into a desperate situation, you see what I'm saying? Just gets me like this. I don't know. Anyone else have any speculation on Dobby's motivation? Dan.
Well, this is sort of an English kind of response. I mean, I always thought that the Dobby character was the weirdest thing in Harry Potter, precisely because I always got the sense that Rowling had a kind of plan and then bailed on it, right? So this is what's the spew thing? It's like book 3? 4?
Four is what comes
so
to mind, yeah.
She creates this thing, and it's kind of a joke, right? Because we're supposed to see Hermione as sort of overly energetic. She's a kid, and she just goes whole hog. But there's never any other house elves who join Dobby, right? I mean, everyone else essentially seems to be happy with their role. And I always got the feeling that Rowling didn't quite know what to do with it, right? Dobby clearly is happier once Harry intervenes, but none of the other house elves seem to be interested in joining him. So I always felt like she didn't quite know what to do with it.
Well,
Does
I mean,
Dobby develop either as a character?
I think he's the same at the end as he is.
well, I mean, that's where you might have some debate. But let me ask you, if we're delving into Rowling's mind here, why have spew at all? What would be the function, the purpose of it? Oh, yeah, sorry.
Well, if you would, I was just kind of thinking because it almost feels like Rowling replaced, she took out the discrimination against women, and I don't know, a lot of avid Harry Potter fans know that Dumbledore is actually homosexual, and Rowling has done multiple interviews where she said that he actually had a gay lover in her backstory of creating the world of Harry Potter. And then you don't see any real racial discrimination. I mean, Harry Potter dates a Chinese girl, so it's almost like she took out the discrimination that actually exists in our world and just replaced it with her own set of the mudbloods. And I feel like J.K. Rowling really put the house elves in there to be kind of I guess you would say an allusion to our own discrimination in society.
Well, yeah, please.
I was gonna say,
Interesting.
Back to sort of what Professor Ricker was saying. If Dobby was not included in the story at all, would he really, besides showing that Harry Potter was a good guy, and saving, he did save his life. So but I was gonna say, before that,
yeah.
But he really doesn't serve a purpose in between kind of besides saving his life, which is pretty big, I guess. I think about it.
Yeah.
He disappears for a while.
He does disappear, so it's it could have been anyone,
He kind of reappears to have this really emotionally heart-wrenching scene where he throws his life on the line for Harry Potter, and it could have been any other character, and it seems like, this is a totally different concern. This is a more literary concern, I suppose, because Rowling had to make the creative decision to say Dobby is going to be the one who's going to lay down his life to save Harry Potter. And it could have been Ron, it could have been Hermione, but like we don't want to kill Ron or Hermione.
No, you can't have Ron.
Get the slave elf, like the poor slave elf.
See,
Social class could play a part in it, like when she was writing it, maybe just like since Dobby's the real lower part, just get rid of him since it really won't.
I have, and once, and then I have, thoughts about what all of you were saying. My philosophically trained and warped mind, right, is saying that, or is telling me, regardless of how well she sort of brackets our explicit injustices in our society, for instance, they are still there. They're applied differently, but they are still there. And so I don't know that we need Dobby just to sort of make this point. Does class have something to do with I don't know that that's giving her enough credit. Oh, we need someone to save it. Let's bring in the house elf and kill him off.
Creature would be more effective. I think Ron died saving his life. I think they have a bigger pull in this.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I actually think killing him off was the perfect character to do that, because at the end of the day, he's the only character that's been truly established as having free choice. He was physically given free choice. So he's the only character that by dying represents the free choice of dying for a cause. The other characters, in some cases, were forced into that role. Hermione and Ron were pushed around by Malfoy. They naturally aren't going to like people of Malfoy status. But he's the only character that was given free choice. And even if you go back to what Professor Pundy had said, none of the other elves wanted to stand up to him, stand up with Spew. But again, if he's the only elf that's been given free choice, he's the only one choosing to stand up because he's the only one with actual free choice.
Of course, the question, again, is how free is this free choice? Could it, as Nathan suggested, could it have been shaped, or is he being affected in ways that he wouldn't otherwise have been, just because Harry is this great guy who liberated him? I don't know.
I was
Mike.
going to say almost exactly.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure we cover your questions.
Isn't there a possibility that Dobby would know free choice even better because he didn't have it and he did have it, whether he'd been given it or not, or somehow won it? He perhaps might have a better appreciation of what it means than someone like Harry, who had presumably known it all his life without really thinking about it very much.
I'm not sure
But for
if
Dobby, there
Harry
was
was-
a sharp moral line there that he was able to cross.
I think there's something to be said about, you have somebody who has type of experience A, type of experience B, and, one can make a better judgment about which is preferable if one has had both experiences and not just one. This is like John Stuart Mill, the pushpin example for those philosophers. If you have the pleasure of rational thinking and learning, then even though you really enjoyed pushpin, you actually like the learning and the thinking and a lot more, and you can say that. So to me, there's an analogy here between, the bully in school who can't or doesn't apply himself academically, and so beats someone up because they're smart. They can do that. But the person who's smart has had that experience and is in a better position to make a judgment. So I understand your point to be Dobby has had the opportunity, unlike other house elves, to be in this position, to be free after not having been free, and can make a judgment. Hey, this is, and thus is more aware of free choice. That's a long-winded way of rephrasing what the heck you said. I don't know, though. See, again, we could talk about Dobby specifically, but the philosophical, my warp mind, I guess, goes to the larger question. Right? What is it that constitutes freedom? What is it that's relevant to the development of someone's self-concept? And how is that going to play in terms of equality of and opportunity generally? if I don't view myself as worthy, then I'm going to have fewer opportunities. And I want to see how that is carried out in our society. I want to see how it's been carried out in history. So I want to take these kinds of things that I see in Harry Potter, or The Hunger Games, or I forgot the title. Hannibal Lecter, or whatever it is, and just think about what can be extracted from them in terms of practices and principles and arguments. And the great thing, I'll end on this note, I just think the great thing about philosophy in general is that it really applies to everything. And I said this earlier today in a different session, but you think about science, you think about politics, you think about religion, law, all kinds of things. And we can consider really important questions of human experience and society and right and wrong and reality. And I guess, having put together some thoughts on Harry Potter, I'm really glad we chose popular culture, because the possibilities are limitless. But I think that's true anyway, because it's philosophy. So I'll end on that note. So again, then we have, let me make this announcement. We have, in addition to the next popular culture talk, in 4 weeks from tonight actually, which is October 30th, some of you know, many of you I think know, we have these informal parties every month or two at the house of a faculty member. If you want to be made aware of when the events are, remember to contact Renee. But the next party, it's not until mid-November. It's going to be at the Chancellor's house. Although he's the Chancellor, and although he's not himself a philosopher, he says he took a philosophy course in college which changed his life, is what he said. And he wants to be involved. So to the point where he wants to host a party. And he and his wife said, "So how many do you expect?" And I said, "Well, 40." And they're like, "Okay, we'll do it." No, so if you want to go, it's we'll be sending out the address. But this will be a neat opportunity to get to know Chancellor Cohen. Cohen, oh my gosh, that's going back. That's Chancellor Keon Cohen was his name, and his wife Nancy, because I think they're really neat people. Anything else? Any other announcements?
No, I think that's it. Although it's true that I'm going to be leading the discussion at the Chancellor's house. So I'm going from horror to humor in 2 weeks. And what that means is the discussion at the Chancellor's house will be called "It's No Laughing Matter, Reflections on Comedy." So I'm taking in any and all jokes, cute stories, New Yorker cartoons, whatever you can find between here and there that you'd like to send me and see me somehow work into my talk or be willing to talk about as part of the discussion. Because I think humor is at least as morally interesting and complicated as horror, and I hope even more so. And that this will be a really interactive chance to think about it together. So I invite any and all humor-related things to that email address too.
Good. Great. Thanks for coming. Get on the list if you're not on the list.